Hey, good evening, friends. We're so grateful for you to join us tonight. If you haven't had a chance to make a connection to the ERLC, my name is Philip Bethencourt. I serve as our Executive Vice President, and tonight I'm going to be leading our conversation on sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention. And as we get started, I'd just like to get a sense for the room by a show of hands. For how many of you is this your first Southern Baptist Convention? Will you raise your hands? Wow. All right. Well, welcome. We're glad you're here. Grateful for you to be a part of this evening. And then a second question, for how many of you is this your first time to be a part of an ERLC event? Excellent. All right. Well, we're so grateful to have you here. Now, on your seats when you came in tonight, there were some special things I want to draw your attention to. The first one is we have complimentary copies of Christianity Today that did a feature article in their June edition highlighting the stories of 10 survivors connected to the Southern Baptist Convention and sexual abuse, and I'd encourage you to check that out. Also, our friends at Harvest House have given you a free sample chapter of Mary DeMuth's new book, We Too, and you can find out more about that there in the handout. And then the third thing that you'll find there is our brand new, hot off the presses, curriculum that just debuted this past week called Becoming a Church That Cares Well for the Abused. Our sexual abuse advisory group spent months working on that as a tool to equip you well to navigate scenarios where abuse situations occur and how to respond effectively to it in light of the gospel. And in the midst of that curriculum, you're going to find a card there that lays out information both about the ERLC National Conference on Abuse coming up in October, as well as our Caring Well Challenge that we'll talk more about this evening. Now, throughout the night, there are going to be people trickling in from the Pastors Conference, and so I'd just like to make a special request. Some of you are treating the seats open next to you like it's a Southwest Airlines flight, and you think if you just put your stuff there or other things like that, somebody might not come and sandwich in next to you, but probably by the end of the evening, we may need some of those spaces. And so if you could make a special effort at the moment to try to squeeze in where you're able to so that we can fit more folks in, that would be a big help to us as we get ready for the conversation. Now, I'm excited to welcome to the stage several friends to have this conversation with us tonight. I'm joined here to my left by Rachel Den Hollander, who many of you are familiar with. Her powerful testimony that happened in the Larry Nassar case with U.S. Olympics gymnastics. She's an author with a brand new book coming out this fall talking about her story and reflecting on the abuse crisis. We're grateful to have you with us, Rachel. And next to her is J.D. Greer, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, pastor of Summit Church in Raleigh, North Carolina. Then to his left is Beth Moore, founder of Living Proof Ministries and an author, a survivor herself. We're so grateful to have you with us, Beth. And then next to her is Susan Cadoni. Susan is out in Georgia, but she's a native of here in Birmingham. And tonight, for the first time ever in a public setting, she's going to share her story about enduring Southern Baptist Convention clergy abuse 35 years ago. And we're so grateful to hear your story and excited to see what insights you're going to share with us. And finally, Russell Moore is on the end of the panel, our president at the ERLC. And what I hope tonight is that in our conversation, we're going to get an opportunity to help us think through this important topic in light of the gospel so that we might find breakthrough and healing in our churches and in our convention, and most importantly, in our own hearts. And to that end, Dr. Moore, we're going to start with you this evening. I'd love to get your assessment. A lot has happened in the last 2 years as it relates to this subject of abuse. Can you lay out for us your sense of the context, why we're having this conversation tonight, and why it's so important that we're tackling this issue of sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention?
Well, there's been a lot revealed over the last couple of years. And one of the things that really struck me was being in a room about this time last year with a group of Southern Baptist women, varying ages, varying backgrounds. And one of the women in the room said, I sense sometimes that some of you brothers are kind of shaken and shocked by some of the revelations that have come out. And what I want you to know is none of us in this room are shocked. And that was really a defining moment for me to look at this and to see. One of the things that I think God is doing is shaking a sense of invulnerability that often happens. Often people will think, well, this happens, but it happens in a Catholic context, or it happens in some other context, or it wouldn't happen in my church. And so God is uncovering some awful things, but at the same time, God is raising up some really amazing and encouraging things as well. And one of those things is listening to the voices of survivors, of those who have ministered to and worked with survivors in churches and in ministries all over the world, who are coming forward and speaking in a way that I think is going to be powerful in terms of the working of the Holy Spirit.
And Beth, if I look around the room, I imagine everybody in here, yourself included, has experienced a roller coaster of emotions as it relates to this subject over the last period of time with sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Convention. Some moments despair, frustration, skepticism, maybe anger, disappointment, but in other moments, maybe hope, optimism, resolve. Can you walk us through how we should be thinking about and reacting to this moment?
Well, none of those emotions are inappropriate. There is a grief that we go through when we face something like this. This is devastating. And so there are always stages of grief, and all of those are involved, all those things, even the feeling of anger and frustration, the sadness over it, all the things that we're going through. But the fact that we have a gathering of this kind, what I get to bring to this mix is age. And I have been in the church all of my life, and so I can tell you, Philip, that one of the things that I feel is relief that we really are talking about it. And I've heard so many people say, well, but it's just more talk. No, I've lived a good while now, and because this is part of my story, and it's part of my story that I have told since the very beginning. I told it in the very first book that I ever wrote. It stays on my radar at all times, and I can tell you that we do have some things happening right now that I have never seen happen. And it's, of course, coming in response to what we've seen, the shock of what we've seen, but I feel relief that it's on paper, that it is in this gathering where we can speak directly to it. I feel hope because we are speaking plainly about it, and I feel a tremendous sense of resolve, and that's what I pray all of us will have in common, is that I can tell you that just this week I was at my granddaughter's dance recital, and I saw a whole stage full of little girls, and it gave me resolve. And when I'm at the shopping mall and I see children and I see adolescents, and I think about them and I think about their future, and I do the statistics in my mind of the people walking past me, I have resolve. And so I want to say something to you. We get to be part of something that even if we don't see it come to the fulfillment that we hope for, we have invested in those children. And so, yes, there is a sense of all of the shock and despair that goes with it, and frustration and anger that we feel, but there is also a great hope that something can be accomplished.
Sure, and as we continue the conversation, I want to make sure you're aware we're going to be live streaming this on our Facebook Live page for the ERLC. So if you have friends at home that weren't able to be here and you want to let them know that we're having this conversation, feel free to send them that link. And as we continue to talk about this roller coaster of emotions, Rachel, I can only imagine the experiences that survivors themselves, advocates that have labored in this space for years, have encountered as they have watched things unfold, as they've wondered what's going to be next. You spend so much time investing in the community of survivors and advocates that work in this space. What is your sense of their reaction to this crisis, and how should we be processing things from their standpoint?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. The response in the survivor community really has quite a wide range. But before we can talk about that, we really need to talk about 3 threshold issues. And the first is understanding what the survivor community isn't out to do. A popular discernment blogger recently said that I and my participation on this panel was akin to sitting behind a glass house and throwing stones. And you need to know that's not what the survivor community is out to do. While there is a wide range of emotions as these things are being processed, and there are going to be differences in opinion about how we deal with the crisis within the SBC, by and large, the survivor community loves the church. They love Jesus. They love the gospel. I have found my greatest refuge and hope in the gospel. And our desire is to see the church do this better. so that it becomes the refuge it was intended to be. The second threshold issue we really need to consider is what is unity? Because oftentimes when we are dealing with very difficult issues like this, the tendency is to withdraw from being very articulate and specific about the failures, to not want to name pastors or leaders or churches or institutions that have egregiously failed, to not want to be upfront about where those failures took place. And oftentimes we do this in the name of unity. Don't say anything negative. We need to be unified. But brothers and sisters, what we are to be unified around is the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are to be unified around the holiness of God. We are to be unified around our confrontation of sin and our confrontation of the darkness. We are to speak light. That is where our unity is. And if we hold back from being articulate and concise and very direct about those failures, we are not unified around what we are commanded to be unified around. And the third aspect that we really need to address is you need to understand where the survivor comes from in order to understand their response. The survivor community, and I think Dr. Moore said this very well, this is not a surprise to us. When you see the survivor community, many of them even outside the SBC tomorrow, what you need to understand is that these men and women have been pleading with the church to hear their voices for decades, and they have been shut out over and over and over again in the name of Christ. That's what the SBC has done to these survivors. You need to understand the perspective that they come from. You need to feel the grief and the betrayal and the harm and the hurt that they have felt. And when you do that, we can start talking about the range of emotion in the survivor community. There is a lot of skepticism, and I think some of it is justified, because the survivor community is used to hearing a lot of words. We are used to hearing abuse is terrible. We're used to hearing placations about what we have experienced. What we're not used to seeing is action. What we're not used to seeing is repentance. And what we're doing up here on this stage is a start, but these are words. Where the rubber is going to meet the road is what the SBC does tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. And that's where the survivor community rightly feels skepticism, because there have been a lot of very good words spoken, but there has also been a significant effort by some factions of the SBC to undermine even some of the good things that are already underway. Pastor Greer gave a very articulate explanation of the problems in the SBC, and he listed some churches that needed investigation. And just a few days later, the executive committee turned around and cleared almost every one of those churches. And they listed 4 criteria, almost all of which are completely useless for determining whether or not a church has handled abuse properly. I don't know the motivations of the executive committee. I don't presume to. But either those criteria were set out without proper knowledge, because we have men who did not step back and say, I am not qualified to make this decision. I need to learn from someone who is. Help me know what I don't know. Or there was an intent to undermine what JD had done. Those are the only 2 options. So there is rightly skepticism in the survivor community about how the SBC is going to act upon these grand words that we are speaking. And it is going to be up to you as messengers and as leaders to ensure that the actions follow the words.
And JD, Rachel. Rachel brought up your February message on the 10 calls to action for abuse, and that's exactly what I wanted us to hear more about tonight. Is it's been clear that you've decided to invest intentionally in the issue of abuse as a major component of your presidency. I'd love for us to understand more why that's the case, what you were trying to accomplish back in February, and what you've seen since then in terms of the work that you're attempting to do on this issue.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is that we understand that at its very core, this is a gospel issue for a couple of very important reasons. One, our gospel is that God gave his life to create a place for people who wanted to run to him for refuge could find refuge. What greater lie could we tell about the gospel than to not be doing everything we can to make sure that our churches reflect that? It belies the gospel, and it confuses people. And if Jesus said it'd be better for somebody to have a millstone tied around their neck and cast into the sea than for someone to cause one of the little ones to stumble, what could make one stumble more than than being abused by somebody who carries God's name with them. And then, what would God say to the leader? How would he feel about the leader that is not doing everything that's necessary to keep that from happening? It has to do with the integrity of our message. People say, well, is this a distraction from the mission? This is the mission. This is the mission of what we do as pastors and what we do as evangelists. The second reason is we understand that it's a gospel issue because, it's just another way of saying that. The credibility of what we actually believe about the gospel is at stake. One of the things that I've learned from Rachel, as well as other survivors that I've had the chance to learn from over the last year or so, is that the strongest words without actions that follow up those words are worse than not saying words at all. It's kind of like, I'm not sure who wrote it. I think this was in the Sexual Abuse Advisory Group report, but it just said if you were involved in an accident and your child was hurt and the paramedics come in and the first thing they do is start to make speeches about how important people's safety is to them, and how you realize at some point they're just virtue signaling. They want you to think well of them, but you're like, this is not the time for words. This is the time to help my child who is sick. I think about this through the lens of, I have 3 daughters and 1 son. I think a shepherd is going to be less concerned about his reputation as a shepherd and more concerned about the sheep that are in harm's way, and say, if Jesus laid down his life to protect the sheep, then I'm going to lay down my reputation, and I'm going to lay down anything that's going on in our institution to make sure that those who are vulnerable and weak know that there is refuge in the gospel, and they see that by the fierceness of the energy I put toward protecting them.
And in that answer, JD, you mentioned our Sexual Abuse Advisory Group report. And if you're not familiar with that, this past week, our Sexual Abuse Advisory Group released a 50-page report that's available if you want to make a note about it at our caringwell.com website. You can go there and check it out. And what it does is it spends time talking through and assessing where we've come from, where we are, and where we need to go. But most importantly, it does that by sharing the stories of survivors. And one of those survivors that is highlighted in the report is Susan Cadoni, that's on the stage with us tonight. I first encountered Susan through the hundreds of interviews that we did with survivors and advocates, experts, pastors, and specialists in this area. And her story is just a powerful one. And as I mentioned at the opening, she's from the Birmingham area. And here we are back in your hometown, the place where you have so many memories, unfortunately, some of them painful because of what you've experienced. And so, Susan, we'd love to hear some of your story, and also to help us think through, as you've processed this moment, what is this meaning to you coming back to your hometown as Southern Baptists are wrestling with this issue?
I'll tell you my story. It has been a long time, but it's good to get it out in the open. When I was 14 years old in my small Southern Baptist church, just outside of Birmingham, we had a new youth minister come, and he started paying attention to me right away. And a few months later, we were at church camp just up I-20, and one night he sent everyone back to the cabins after the fire, and he asked me to stay behind. And he said, "Susan, I really think God is calling you to help me in my ministry." And I really wasn't that surprised because, as I said, he had been paying attention to me, and I didn't really know what that meant. But then he said, "You're really smart and you're clever and you're more mature than most of the kids in the youth group." And as he said that, I recall that I was standing by a tetherball pole, and he was tossing the ball back and forth. And as he continued to talk, he wrapped the ball around the pole to the point that I was tied to the pole. These are typical grooming behaviors of a sexual predator, to build up the child, to make the child feel important and special and called. When I was tied to the pole, he said, "Susan, will you answer God's call? And will you help me in my ministry?" And I said, "Yes." And he leaned over and he kissed me. And I just remember being extremely confused, and I unwound myself from the pole and walked back to the cabin. And I didn't know that he was slowly leading me into what would become an 18-month period of progressively worse sexual abuse. It began with flattery and attention, but it really ended with threats and intimidation. He would say things to me like, "Susan, if you tell anyone, your father, he's not really in good health. He'll probably have a heart attack and die. And Susan, if you're never really going to be able to get married now, and you're not going to go to college or have a future. And Susan, you have lost your salvation because of what you have done. And then finally, Susan, you are hurting my ministry. Things became intolerable to the point that I knew I had to take the risk to tell someone, and I went down my list of people. I was afraid to tell my parents, and I decided that I could trust my pastor. I was really certain that I could tell my pastor and that he would help me. And at the time, I had turned 15 years old, and I had a learner's permit. And I remember I had access to a car. And after supper one night, I drove to his home. I thought he would be home with his family, but he was home alone. I gave him just the highlights of what was happening, and I said, "Can you please help me? Can you stop this?" And he said, "I don't know, Susan. You're a smart kid. Seems to me you could have done something about this by now. I think you've brought this on yourself." And then he started pressing me for details about what happened. And this is painful for me to remember, but when I wouldn't tell him what happened, he stood up and he stood over me. And remember, we were alone in his house, which, at the time I didn't think was a bad thing because I trusted him. And he said, "If you won't tell me, why don't you go in the back and show me?" And I knew then that once again I had landed in the presence of evil. I had no idea how that had happened, but I knew that I had landed in the presence of evil. He went on to fire my youth minister, and then he picked up with me where my youth minister left off for about 4 more months, maybe 6 months. One Sunday, the chairman of deacons took the pulpit, and he said, "Church family, our pastor has resigned for health reasons." And I thought, this is great. I am free. I am finally free of these men. My pastor came back about a week later, and he called me to his home, and by that time I was too afraid of him not to go, even though I knew that he was leaving. I had not yet learned that he was having an affair with my Sunday school teacher, and that's why he had gotten fired. Someone had caught him in that. He called me to his home, and I went, and he said, "Susan, if you ever tell anybody what has happened, I will find you and I will kill you." And I want you to know that I believed him because I was used to hearing threats from my youth minister and my pastor. And so when I look back on what's happened in our denomination over the 35 years since that occurred, I don't see a lot of change in how things are handled. I don't see a lot of change in how often these things happen. What I want you to know is that my youth minister served churches in Birmingham until his death in 2017. That is 33 years of unimpeded ministry in this town. We tracked him, my husband and I, for a few years. I eventually had to turn my attention to raising my family. But he served until he died, and he died young. My pastor is still alive, and he lives north of here. So I think that's kind of a picture for me of how things have gone in our denomination. I call this the catch and release policy, where these men are caught in the act of doing something like a sexual crime, and we release them because we want to deal with it in the church. So it's a catch and release practice that I see happen over and over and over. I think we have just a complete failure to call law enforcement when these things happen. And I think that we've extended mercy far too quickly instead of justice, when justice is what many of these individuals deserve, well, what all of these individuals deserve. So that's really what I would call my reflection on what is happening, and that is my story.
Beth, when I hear Susan bravely share her story, I sense a lot of helplessness in her experience. She was helpless in the moment, and While every person in this room has a different story than Susan, there are a lot of women across the Southern Baptist Convention who've experienced a sense of helplessness as they've watched this play out over the last several years within the Southern Baptist Convention. And I know last year you wrote a letter to your brothers in which you talked about your concerns related to treatment of women and the abuse issue in general, giving a voice to many women across the convention that might not otherwise have had it. And I would love for you to help us think through the way the women see this, and especially what it looks like in terms of how we respond in a way that can either obscure or reveal the gospel and how we handle this crisis.
You know, what we will have the tendency to do in our flesh is make this a war between men and women, when the truth of it is, where the gospel is concerned, this is a war between men and women of God against powers and principalities of darkness. That if we come together as men and women and we fight this darkness, this is where we all see God proclaim his great name and do the work that he wants to do in the church. And one of my great concerns is, please understand that abuse happens anywhere humanity happens. Where there's a lot of humanity, there is going to be abuse. But what I want so much for us to reckon with, honestly, is that our culture makes us vulnerable to it because there is a disparity between the way we value men and women. And I'm not talking out of feeling, I'm talking out of what has proven to be factual. It reminds me so much of the verse in Luke 24:11 where it says that the women come and tell about the risen Lord, and it says, but they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. And we've seen that in our culture, where women have been trying to say these things have been happening to us, and the spiritual manipulation. No, we've got to protect the church. You don't want to destroy the church. Just think what this would do to the man of God. And one of the things that I've heard over and over, Philip, if I might bring this up, that I even had a conversation today. Rachel and I were with some survivors before we ever came out here, and I knew it was meant to be so that we would have that razor sharp awareness of the kind of ramifications that this has. But listen to this for a moment and see if you can understand what I'm talking about in our culture. How many women have been told that when they came forward were asked if they were raped, and if they were not raped, that, well, thank goodness, you'll still be a virgin for your husband. As if their only value would be that they could give a future mate their virginity. Do you understand what I'm saying? And here's the thing. I was raised in a large family. Not everybody in the family was an abuser, and not everybody in the family was abused. But because there was abuse in the family and there was an abuser in the family, the whole family was sick. And what I want to say to my own family of Southern Baptists, our family is sick. We need help. This is not something that this is not conjecture. This is a proven fact. It has come forward. It is before our very eyes. And what will just kill us will be denial. We will never get healthy if we cannot get honest. We have a very, very serious problem because we have this built-in disesteem for women, and it's got to change. We've got to get down to the root of it, where we understand that this is being perpetuated. You may say, I've never treated women that way. Well, again, maybe you're not the abuser or the abused, but you're in a family where it's happening rampantly. And we have to deal with it, and we have to deal with it straightforward and without getting defensive, and just owning up to it, that our family's sick. How do we get well? How do we look this in the face and go, let's deal with this, and let's deal with it together, men and women, side by side.
And Philip, I would love to piggyback just on that question a little bit, and again, bring the survivor perspective to it, and help you understand, one of the most important things you can do in this question of how are women being perceived. You need to understand that what you choose to prioritize to speak out against, and what you choose to be acceptable to live in grace with, speaks volumes about how much you care about women and how much you care about the issue of abuse. Within the Southern Baptist Convention, there are tens of thousands of churches. So there are many, many issues where we are comfortable saying, we live in grace here. There has been a great deal of discussion, even recently, on some of the doctrines of the Trinity, where Southern Baptists are disagreeing, the eternal functional subordination of the Son being a primary one, a doctrine that is applied to male-female relationships, and applied to argue that women are subordinate to men perpetually, all men, the same way that arguably certain teachers teach that Christ is subordinate to the Father eternally. And we're okay saying, well, we're okay to live in grace with different views of the Trinity. But we're not okay to live with different views of complementarianism. We're going to treat certain things as a crisis facing the community, but we're not going to treat pastors who employ pedophiles as a crisis. Now, please hear me. I'm not saying we don't have those discussions. I'm not saying there aren't areas where we live in grace. What I am saying is that our balance for what we prioritize, what we say, this is a crisis level, where we are willing to say, I can live in grace here, but I can't live in grace here, speaks volumes about how you view the women and children in your congregation. It speaks volumes about how serious you really believe sexual abuse is. So I plead with you, when you have these discussions, when you get on social media, when you discuss with leaders and people in your church, ask yourself the question, where am I willing to extend grace? Why here and not here? And what am I prioritizing? What am I treating as a crisis? And check your balance. It's not that we don't have those discussions, it's how we balance those discussions. And brothers and sisters, we're not doing a good job in how we balance them.
And Dr. Moore, what I hear Rachel talking about is the Baptist Faith and Message is clear about a complementarian view of gender roles, even if there have been in recent days disagreements about how that might be applied. But when we come to the issue of abuse, your insights are so helpful, but the other side of it is there are many that wonder if complementarian theology leads to abuse. So would you say complementarianism in the Southern Baptist Convention is a contributing factor to it, and how should we process through the connection between the issue of gender and sexual abuse?
Well, complementarianism ought to be about complementarity, which means that just as a child needs a mother and a father, ideally, the church certainly needs both mothers and fathers. So we believe that the Bible speaks to us as persons. The Bible speaks to us in some ways distinctively as men and women. Men need women, women need men. Mothers are different than fathers within the church and within the home in some ways. But we have a lot of differences sometimes, as Rachel said, about what are some of those secondary and tertiary sorts of applications of what that ought to look like. And when that suddenly becomes an issue not of what do we think the Bible teaches, but how can we vilify one another who don't do things exactly the way that we do them, something really, really wrong has gone on. So what I'll say is this. A Southern Baptist Convention that doesn't have a place for Beth Moore doesn't have a place for a lot of us, because Beth wouldn't do everything the way I do it. I wouldn't do everything the way that Beth does it. We love each other, we learn from each other, and that's the way our churches are supposed to be. And so what I would say is, the Bible gives us a beautiful picture of the way men and women need one another. And in the moment that we're in right now, to suggest that the problem that we have is that women are speaking too much seems crazy to me.
Now, as we continue the conversation, Great, go ahead.
Again, for those of you who are pastors, I would urge you to ask this question as you're in the pulpit. I think it is very telling that I have heard hundreds, literally hundreds of sermons directed on the quiet and submissive spirit that a woman should have. I have heard not one on how to value a woman's voice. I have heard not one on the issue of sexual assault. So brothers, I used to teach a worldview course. I taught teenage boys, and I would say to them, it mystifies me that all of the crazy things teenage boys do are justified as that's the way boys are. You're going to take pool noodles and you're going to beat each other to a bloody pulp, and you're going to roll up wet dish towels and smack each other. And when your mom says, "What are you guys doing?" "We're guys, Mom. That's how God made us." But as soon as an issue comes along that needs to be fought for, all that masculinity disappears. And the women are left on the front line with you telling them, be quiet, submissive, fight your battles. Do it better, brothers.
Philip, may I add something to that quickly? One of the things that I think about all the time is that the goal, the end result of all sanctification and obedience is Christ-likeness. And so whatever we do, this, if we want to create a safe environment for men, women, and children to thrive, what we're after is Christ-likeness. And so to emulate him and the way he went out of his way to not just notice that a woman was there, but to invite her in, to make a place for her, to give her dignity, and to speak straight to her and say to Simon the Pharisee, Simon, do you see this woman? To yearn with him to see her through his eyes, through the eyes of Christ. And so I say that to you because whatever it is we do and wherever we fall in complementarianism, the whole goal is Christ-likeness. That's who we're looking at. This is how we treat one another. So that, to me, it must be said, that is the bottom line. That's the way to create an environment where people flourish and are safe.
And now as we continue the conversation, I'm just curious again, by show of hands, how many of you in the room serve as a pastor or on pastoral staff at a church? Would you raise your hand for us? All right, JD, that's a pretty good chunk of the room here. You serve as a pastor there at the Summit Church, and I'd love for you to talk pastor to pastor with us for just a minute. Church leaders are pulled in a bunch of different directions. There's many priorities. Help us think through why this issue of abuse should be a priority for the leaders of the churches in the room, and how they should think about navigating that when they go back to their home communities and their churches.
Well, I mean, let me just speak on the local church level. I mean, John 10 tells us that following the Good Shepherd, that we are supposed to lay down our lives for the sheep. And this would be an application of that. It's just in line with our gospel witness. And so, only a fool, and I say that very lightly, but only a fool would listen to stories like we've heard and look at statistics and numbers and say, that's not happening here. I know everybody's great. And it's just that I don't know how blind somebody would have to be to do that. So yes, it can happen in your church. And only those who are vigilant and only those who are committed to having the best practices in place can, I think, be able to answer to God faithfully and say, I did what you told me to do in John 10 of protecting the sheep. So that was, what I'd say on one level. On the other hand, I would say in this kind of moment we're in right now, we realize that as a convention of churches, that we've got a statement that we've got to make not only to our own people, but we've got to make it to the world about how committed we are to this. And so even if for you somehow could know that it's never been an issue in your church, even if you did have that knowledge, which again I would say is not a wise confidence, but even if you had that knowledge, and this is a moment for us to come together and say that we are going to do this for the sake of our larger body of churches. What kind of statement does it make when we come together and say we're going to take something like this Caring Well Challenge, and we're going to make sure that we have, as a church, been faithful and responsible, and we're going to encourage others to do it. Say, well, I got a lot of other things I'm trying to do at our church this year. I understand that. As a pastor, I understand that. But I'm saying this is one that you got to read what the Spirit of God is doing. You've got to read what's happening in the moment, and you've got to make this one a priority, right? For the sake of your people and for the sake of the witness. You say, well, it doesn't exactly work for me the way that, that you're laying it out. I understand that, okay? But I'm saying take it, figure out what it looks like, what it works like, and be committed to it. Already, I almost hesitate mentioning this because I don't want to ever imply that we're going to do anything for the sake of trying to get people to not leave churches. Okay, that ought to be far away from our mind right now in that sense, reputation and those things. But already we know, the Lifeway study that came out recently showed that 1 in 10, young adults under the age of 35 have already left Southern Baptist churches for issues related to this one. Right? So what is that, what kind of statement does it make to our community when we say, hey, there is a problem, but we're just not willing to take it because we're just afraid it's going to be a little too cumbersome. It's not too cumbersome, not for our daughters and our sons. And it's certainly the right thing to do in this moment. And so I do think we need to come together in unity.
JD mentions that Caring Well Challenge, and I want to make sure you're aware of that. That was one of the handouts that we gave you in the curriculum book, is a card with all the details about it. And you're going to find those next steps at caringwell.com. But we've had so many churches reach out to us through the work of the Sexual Abuse Advisory Group and saying, we're ready to make a difference. What do we do now? And what we're trying to do is provide a 12-month, 8-step process that every church in the Southern Baptist Convention can step into. Not because we think this alone is going to fix it, but because we know this is a good next step for us to join together in unity as a right next step. And what I would encourage each one of you to do as we're coming out of here tonight is to visit that website, to size up the steps, send it around to the leaders in your church and say, what would it look like for us to take these steps to ensure that our church is doing everything we can to be safe for survivors and safe from abuse?
Phil, can I add one thing to this? The vast majority of Southern Baptist pastors that I've talked to about this over the last year are not uncaring about this. Most of them got into the ministry because they love people. And yes, there are wolves and there are hirelings, and we need to be aware of that because Jesus told us there would be those. But I know the vast majority of Southern Baptist pastors are not uncaring, but many of them are complacent because they're asleep kind of at the wheel. They're sleeping when the wolves are coming in, which would make, for a delinquent shepherd. So many of them are complacent. Many of them are just not understanding of what is happening. This is a time for pastors who care and who are not insensitive to this. I believe that what this advisory group and what the ERLC have laid out is a very healthy path forward. Like Philip said, it's not the end game. This is not a check mark, now let's move on. But I think it is the beginning of a process that can take us, to use Beth's analogy, to a more healthy place where we can say we've reflected the gospel better than that.
And I'm especially burdened for that tonight, Susan, hearing your story. And even in the first remarks that you shared about it, we could see the way that your church mishandled it. But I imagine the story didn't end there for you and your encounters with that church. And so if you're willing to share more about your experiences in the aftermath of your abuse at your church and what we might be able to learn from those experiences about what our churches need to be thinking about as it relates to this issue.
Well, as you heard from my story, my church really mishandled my disclosure in that I ran into 2 sexual predators. But the primary problem was that there was no one else to tell. There were no women designated in any kind of semi-leadership position or anyone that I could really go to. It was a small church. I think that's another factor. As a small church, it just wasn't equipped. And I don't believe things are that much different today. This church did not really have the resources. And not long after my pastor left, the fallout from just him leaving and what occurred led that church to fold. And they were bought out by another congregation later on. So you sort of see the path of how the sin followed in that regard. I think there should always be, and this is part of the Caring Well curriculum, a designated group of people who are there to care for the survivors. I rely on research a great deal in my work, and what the research tells me is that the one thing that will keep a child from having a very predictable adult life cycle of trouble and problems over their adult years is the intervention of a caring adult when abuse occurs. if that child doesn't have that intervention, they're going to face a lifetime of difficulty. I did not have anyone to go to, and I had no such intervention. And so equipping a church, to me, just makes sense. It doesn't imply that a church is not a safe place. So to take on this particular curriculum does not imply that the church is not already doing things. What it does is equip everyone in the church to respond to trauma and to help the survivors who may have experienced trauma at home even understand that the church has become a safer place to go and deal with those things. And when the church becomes a safer place for all survivors, I think it will begin to build trust in those who have left the church, and we'll see a return wave of people coming back to the church. And for all of the pastors in the room, when you look out on your congregations on Sunday and you think you're seeing apathy, I believe what you may be seeing is the after effects of childhood trauma and people who are just distracted, trying to recover from things they experienced when they were young. And if we are more equipped with knowing how to deal with those things as well as proclaiming the gospel, I think we won't just save people for eternity in their how they come to know God, but we'll save them while they're here on earth too.
And you mentioned that curriculum, Susan, and I want to make sure you know more about it. It's not just the workbook that you have in your hands that we gave to you tonight. We partnered with Lifeway along with members of our sexual abuse advisory group to prepare this curriculum with you in mind. And the whole idea is, what would it look like to provide a 12-session video-based curriculum for church leaders that would train you on the full range of issues related to responding when disclosure of abuse occurs and how to minister to survivors in the aftermath, to be the kind of people that wrap around folks like Susan in those moments. And one of the things that we have, I just want to let you know while this is going on, in case it's helpful, is our friends from Lifeway Ministry Grid are going to be back in the left corner over here on your way out. If you want to talk more about that curriculum, how to get plugged into it in the video-based format, all of those issues, they'd be happy to walk your church through it. We've been blown away by the level of response that's already happened from churches engaging with this curriculum since then and doing what we can to equip churches to have a word to people like Susan. And Beth, as I'm hearing her lament the fact that there was nobody there in that moment, I'm looking out at this room and there are people that I know who have stories just like Susan's. And I know on this live stream on the ERLC Facebook page, there are people tuned in, hanging on by a thread as they're wrestling through this, as they're watching us encounter this. And I just wonder if you might speak a word over the survivors that are in the room and online tonight. What word would you give them? What encouragement would you have for them in this moment?
What I hope that you know tonight is that everything about this means that you are seen, that God has never taken his eye off of you, and that what he's doing, he has made certain in such a blatant way that we could not ignore it. I mean, to bring it forth so obviously before our eyes that we have to deal with it. That is a God who cares and says, time is up on this. We're about to deal. And so I pray that you will know that you are seen, that you are known by God, that you are not alone, that there are so many of us who have been where you have been. We are on this journey with you. We may be behind you. We may be a couple of steps in front of you, but we are all on it together. And there are a whole lot of us to do this together. And that he has never left you. I want you to know that nothing that has happened to you has hijacked the plan that God has had for you since before the foundation of the world. That he already knew everything that would happen to us, everything that we would go through. Your life already had opportunity before that ever happened. God already knew it was coming, and that nothing has hijacked what's going to make your life meaningful, what can give you that abundant life Jesus came to give you. Nothing has been able to destroy that. Distract it, yes. Try to rob from you, yes. But let me tell you something. God can redeem so much of the pain you have been through. And I want to say this to you. This has been very important to me in my healing process because I've had an opportunity. Rachel is getting to experience the same thing. Susan is going to experience exactly the same thing, in that we get get to turn around and we get to help someone along. And it means a lot. Philippians 2:17, Paul talks about, listen, if I've poured out my life for the service and sacrifice coming from your faith, then I rejoice, and I feel that. I've gotten to use that as part of my testimony and walk with some women along the way, but I don't have to figure out, was it worth it to me? I want you to know that what God can do, it's not about him making it worth it, it's about him making it matter. And I promise every single one of you in this room and on the other side of that screen, what God can do is you walk with him through a process, lifelong process. This is not about arrival. This is about walking. This is not just about getting our healing. It is about coming to know our healer. And because we're coming to know our healer, that we begin insisting on healthier places around us, because we begin to know health when we see it. But that you know that God has a place of flourishing for you, and that he is bringing you to a place where you can aid the body of Christ near you. There's a ministry for you, and he means for that to be part of your process. And so it matters. What I can tell you now is that I pray that the enemy is sorry that he messed with me. And I pray that he's sorry that he messed with Rachel. And I pray he's sorry that he messed with Susan and so many others, that it backfired on him so badly because ministry came from it. So I ask you to know, do not get confused and think that Christ is like all Christians. Christ is a stand-alone. He has no darkness at all. He has no dark side. You can fully trust him. In church, the more we imitate him, the more they can come into a place of trust and flourishing with us.
Yeah, that's a good word, and so thankful for that. Dr. Moore, one of the patterns that emerged from Susan's story was one that we saw play out on the pages of the Houston Chronicle and other reporting on Southern Baptist sexual abuse over and over again, which is the fact that a predator would abuse someone in one context, and as Susan put it, there would be a catch and release scenario where they move on to the next one. And we've seen troubling trends emerge through this reporting that need to be addressed. But in the midst of that conversation, one of the issues that will often come up is the subject of church autonomy, and the fact that in our unique Southern Baptist polity, that creates certain avenues that we can address this issue. One of the things that you've said is that church autonomy should not be an excuse for a lack of accountability. Can you help us think through that conversation about church autonomy and how that should be shepherded as we discuss this conversation in Southern Baptist life?
Well, in our Baptist ecclesiology, no church has authority over any other church. But we have always understood that we have an accountability toward one another when we cooperate with one another. So on something, if a church down the street decides to start baptizing infants, then no church can say, you can't do that. That's not Baptist. But other Baptist churches can say, you're not cooperating with us because that falls outside of our doctrinal parameters. How much more so when you're dealing with negligent refusal to act when it comes to the abuse of vulnerable people. We may not be able to direct what goes on in another congregation, but we certainly are able to say, we have an accountability to our witness together, and you are not in good fellowship with us. We do that with many other things. We have to do that with this as well. That also means, though, that somehow we have to have a conversation about getting back to what we previously had in many places in Baptist life, say a century ago, of ordination that was meaningful, that involved the entire community, where we had the sort of communication between churches where we understood and knew who was where and what sort of ministry was going on there. That is going to be a big step in recovering this. But simply to say, well, church autonomy means that we can't deal with this is horrific. We have an accountability to one another. We're in cooperation with one another, and cooperation means mutual accountability. We need to do that here.
That gives us such a good window into our unique Southern Baptist dynamics. But Rachel, there are issues that need to be addressed universally as it relates to this topic, regardless of people's church background. And one of the things I'm so grateful for in your writing and speaking on this, and your new book that's coming out, What is a Girl Worth, is you've helped us not only to understand your story and encounter, but also use that as a means to help the rest of us process this subject. And when you think about the difficult subject of abuse, there are often common myths that people believe, or common mistakes that they make in responding to it. Can you help us think through some of those dynamics tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a wide variety of things that we can learn from my story, from all of our stories. And there's a number of very practical things that churches frequently get incorrect when they handle abuse. I'll use a couple specific examples that are already out there publicly for two important reasons. One, I find when we talk about these issues, the practical examples are very important to understand, oh, that's what it looks like. Because it's not something that we're always very familiar with. And secondly, we need to understand that even leaders in institutions, often that we look up to and respect, can err not because they are always being malicious, not because they're always wolves, but because they have made some very common errors. And so one that I will point to is an article that just came out today about Matt Chandler's church, the Village Church, and the issue of the statement that they released to their church. And when there was a pedophile who was found to have abused someone in the congregation, it was reported to the police, so that was a very positive step. But then they made a very critical mistake. And their critical mistake was that then when they announced to the church what had happened, they did not identify the abuser. They did not identify the exact type of crime that had occurred. And they stated that the person had no access to children in the Village Church without informing the congregation that they had been on staff and did have access up to that point to children in the church. And the reason that that is such a critical mistake is because they instigated a police investigation that then no one in their congregation who might hold a piece of that puzzle could participate in. They created a situation where no parents who might have children who were victimized could check with their children. So the police investigation that they started was good, but they did not create a scenario where their church could actually actively be involved in the police investigation and a real investigation could occur to determine if there were other victims, other pieces of the puzzle. And part of the reason that that took place is because they followed a model that was more institution protected than victim oriented. So the good news is that for churches on a practical level, where you get your information and how educated you become on the issue of abuse becomes a driving factor in how well you will respond. Fixing the practical issues is very easy for churches. What we have a much more difficult time with is the heart shift. And that's where I think the Southern Baptists are really going to have to focus. We need the practical measures. You need to get information from good sources. But the heart shift is what we really need to see. And there are a couple things that I have found very helpful in thinking through. And there are two questions that I typically challenge leaders to ask. What would you say if it was another type of crime? And how would you treat this if it was a physical injury? So if you are a pastor, for example, and you find a dead body on your study floor, what would you do? Would you say, I am the pastor, God has equipped me to handle all matters in this church, therefore I am going to investigate this? Probably not. So what would you do if it was another crime? Do the same thing for sexual abuse. Report it to the authorities. If a victim came to you and they said, I was robbed, would you say, were you wearing an expensive suit? Did you invite it? Did you advertise your money? What would you do if it was another type of crime? What would you do if it were a physical injury? If someone in your congregation were, say, hit by a drunk driver and they had a spinal cord injury, would you counsel them that forgiveness is going to heal the physical pain that they feel, the damage that's done to their body? Would you tell them you need to keep all of your medical care, all of your therapy in the church, because here's the only place you're going to find healing? No, we don't treat other injuries that way. We don't treat other crimes that way. We don't treat other victims that way. And we need to understand that the victims of sexual abuse are every bit as much a victim as a victim of robbery or a victim of murder. We need to understand that the damage that is done by sexual abuse is every bit as real as the physical injury. There is There are physical ramifications, neurologic ramifications to trauma and to abuse, and those required skilled, competent professionals. We talk all the time about the beauty of the body of Christ and all of the members that God has equipped. But far too often, when we are dealing with trauma and sexual abuse, we don't rely on the other members of the body. We, in effect, say to the hand, the Christian psychologist, I don't need you. To the trauma counselor, to the social worker, to the law enforcement, I have no need of you. And that is not the way God designed the world. That is not the way God designed the church. The good news for pastors is that you don't have to be the be-all, end-all. You cannot carry the weight for handling every single aspect in your church. You are not asked by God to do that. There are spheres and jurisdictions of authority. There are other members of the body who are equipped and trained to handle things that you will encounter. This does not make your role irrelevant. It does not challenge your authority. It does not challenge the sufficiency of Scripture. It upholds the biblical model of the body of Christ working together. And the role you have is incredibly vital, but you need to understand that role. And you need to respond to survivors, respond to crime the same way that you would respond to other victims of crime, and the same way that you would respond to a parishioner who has suffered a catastrophic physical injury that you can see. Because the reality is that the injuries those survivors have suffered are likely going to be much greater and longer lasting than any physical injury you will encounter.
That's a good word. One of the things that Rachel is doing for us is reminding us we need to understand that role. And part of the conversation we're having tonight is a first step in helping you to understand that. But beyond that, all of these panelists are going to be with us in October at the ERLC National Conference when we spend 3 days together thinking about sexual abuse and other types of abuse, what it looks like to understand them, to prevent them, to care well for them. And on that same Caring Well card that you got in your curriculum book as you came in, there's details about the conference. We want to encourage you to be a part of that. And we're going to finish this evening with 2 final questions, one to you, JD, and then one to you, Susan. And JD, for understandably so, there are skeptics who have watched Southern Baptist for years feel as if there's a lot of talk and not much action on this issue. And I would say to you as president, do you think that's a fair critique? And are we just going to keep talking about this, or is there action? What are some of the actions that you feel like are coming up in the next few days at the convention, and actions that we might take from here collectively moving forward?
It's absolutely a fair critique, and I think that's one that we've had to very painfully reckon with and say that this is not an hour that needs better pronouncements, it's an hour that needs action. And so with the help of this advisory group and with the help of the RLC and with Lifeway, we've got, I think it's 8 things that we want to see happen. I'm going to be talking about all 8 of those in the report that we'll be giving together on Wednesday afternoon. There is some changes in our governing documents that are going to be presented. There are some changes in the bylaws, which means not just what we say we think about it, but how we are going to follow up with it. There have been the Caring Well challenge that you've heard about, the offering of some very practical things that will help pastors get equipped on it. I'll just tell you, I've been very moved and pleased with how at every possible level of Southern Baptist life, the local association level, the state convention level, the entity level, there have been very serious and willing conversations about this. They have come together to say, and we recognize that when it comes to the restorative nature of how to help churches deal with this, it's not just something that's going to come from the executive committee or something from the upper level of Southern Baptist leadership. It happens everywhere. And so we're talking about how to foster those partnerships, and there's a few things we'll be presenting on that regard. I know that you mentioned the conference that's coming up. I'm trying to remember all 8 of them, and that's about all I can get out right now. But you have to come on Wednesday to hear the other 3 ones that are going to be really good too. I think most of all, what we need to have though is right now this is a time for lament. It is a time for sorrow. It is a time for humility and brokenness. And I believe that we'll hear that at different points in the convention of just acknowledging there's been failure here. And there are wounds. There are people who are broken because of our failures in the past. And we want to reckon with that, and we want to, with God's help, go forward in a way that helps heal and helps change things.
And one of the first opportunities we're going to have to take action collectively as a convention is tomorrow afternoon, whenever the executive committee is going to bring forward a proposal to form a standing credentials committee made up of 9 people who will be the body responsible for handling the inquiry process into churches whose may not be in friendly cooperation with the convention, whether that's related to abuse or other issues as well. And we have the opportunity to take that step to ensure that we have the right people in the right governing body enabling us to respond effectively to that, because we know that we want to move beyond just talk and towards action. And that's one tangible way that it can happen even here in Birmingham. Well, speaking of Birmingham, Susan, let's come back to your story one more time before we close. We've heard the traumatic experiences you've encountered. We've heard the way that your church had failed you in that moment. But walk us through what it's been like for the last 35 years. How has this affected you? And what are some of the lessons we might take away for better understanding the way that this type of trauma can shape the life of a survivor and how churches can come alongside them through that journey?
The research shows over and over that survivors of sexual abuse, and particularly sexual abuse in the church, often face an adult life cycle, as I mentioned earlier, of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, isolation, hopelessness, suicidality, more of those things. I certainly have dealt with those as well. I want you to know that even though my youth minister and pastor said I wouldn't go to college and I wouldn't get married, I did go to college and I did get married. And I'm happy to celebrate that tonight, because tonight is my 30th wedding anniversary with my husband, George.
That's wonderful.
It hasn't been an easy road, and my family will tell you that I have been a distracted parent at times, and sometimes a little overvigilant. I remember distinctly when my girls went into the middle school ministry at church. They were fond of the middle school ministry, and therefore I was convinced that the middle school pastor was a bad guy, and I followed him and stalked him, and so I have been overvigilant. I have dealt with a lot of things, and my family has been very patient as I have navigated this recovery. One of the things I would say to every survivor in the room is that this is not something that you get behind or you put past you or you get over. I want you to know that if you think that, or if someone has told you that, I'd love for you just to lay that down and know that this is something that we manage. It's part of our lived experience. It's part of who we are. And we can do that with the Savior who experienced trauma himself, because he understands. So I would like to tell you that today. I would like to just speak to the church about how you can come on alongside of survivors. We've talked a lot about the curriculum, and we've talked a lot about the role of different people in the church, and Rachel spoke about how we need to use the different skill sets of others, and Dr. Moore talked about autonomy. I did not participate in the Me Too movement, and I didn't, even though I admired it, because I thought I wanted to protect my privacy, and that's kind of gone now. I think, though, if I had to create a hashtag that really would exemplify my message to the church, it would be all of us. Because it's not really about me anymore. I have a story, but so do many of you in this room. It's going to take the entire church to deal with this problem. And so I believe it's going to take all of us, because all of us can look for predators. All of us can look for grooming behaviors. All of us can help vet new hires and can help hold leaders accountable. All of us can educate each other about the ramifications of sexual abuse in the church and the lifetime effects of trauma. All of us can take responsibility for the church. And as a survivor of sexual abuse in the Southern Baptist Church, I think I have earned the right to call the church to action. And so I call all of us, not just me and not just you and not this church and not that church, but all of us to action tonight, to take this seriously and to take this conversation home to your church.
So in just a moment, I'm going to ask Dr. Moore if you'd close us in a word of prayer. But before we do that, one of the things I want you to leave with is hearing Susan's words calling us to action. So often when it comes to this issue, the question that churches might wrestle with is, are we doing enough? But what I would challenge you is, will you go back to your church and instead of asking the question, are we doing enough, would you instead ask, are we doing all we can? And taking those steps, join us in the Caring Well Challenge, come to the conference, jump into the curriculum, all of these things. And you may have questions that arose over the course of tonight's conversation. Our team and some of the Sexual Abuse Advisory Group will be around tonight, but we'll also be at the ERLC booth throughout the week. And in addition to that, we'll be slipping an email into your inbox with next steps related to all of these items here in the next few hours, and so you can be on the lookout for that. We want to walk with you in this journey. We want to see the whole culture of our convention shifting to where we are doing everything we can to make our churches safe for survivors and safe from abuse. So Dr. Moore, as we close things out, would you finish us with a word of prayer? But before he does that, will you join me in thanking our panel for their wisdom tonight?
Let's pray together. Lord, I don't even know what to say, because all I can think about is sitting here listening to this brilliant scholar, Susan, share her story, is about that 15-year-old girl here in Birmingham, and how many more 15-year-old girls and boys there are all around the country who don't know where to turn. And so, Lord, in a moment like this, sometimes there can only be groanings too deep for words. And to ask the Holy Spirit to intercede where we don't know how to pray. So, Lord, I pray for the people in this room. As Philip said, I can look around the room and see people who have been through awful things. I can see people who have bravely stood up. And Lord, I pray that you would empower. I pray that you would guide. I pray that you would convict. I pray, Father, that you would not give us a sense of confidence as though we know how to handle this, as though there were some technique that we could master. But that, Lord, you would give us a sense of our own need for you, for wisdom, for the power of the Spirit. And Lord, we pray that we would have a word for those 15-year-old and 14-year-old and 13-year-old and 35-year-old and 75-year-old people who feel as though there is nowhere to turn, even to Jesus. Would you help us to point to Jesus? Would you help us to be those who walk in the way of John the Baptist, pointing a finger in the distance to say, there is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. We need the blood of Christ. We need the Holy Spirit. Father, would you give that to us? Would you help us over the next couple of days as our convention of churches gathers together? Would you help everything that happens here to be in line with your good purposes? Would you help everything that happens here to be in conformity to love and to justice together in the way of the cross? And Lord, I pray for those in this room who are bearing deep burdens, maybe those who are watching this, who are bearing deep burdens, and who maybe haven't talked to anybody before. Lord, would you be present with them right now? May they not just know cognitively that you're with them, but Lord, would you help them to feel your presence with them right now? And then would you help us to bear one another's burdens. We ask this in Jesus' name.